Bruiser Brody wasn't just a wrestler. He was a one-man demolition crew who somehow turned unprofessional into a full-time gimmick. Bookers feared him, fans adored him, and wrestlers mostly wanted to strangle him. Brody walked into a locker room like a tornado, unpredictable, loud, and guaranteed to leave someone bleeding or fuming. The guy made refusing to do jobs look like an art form, except instead of paint, he used chairs, fists, and the sheer will to ruin your night. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to make enemies, and usually succeeded. Plenty of wrestlers respected Brody's toughness, but respect and hatred are only a hair apart in this business. And Brody lived on that razor's edge. You either admired his stand against promoters, or you wanted him 6 feet under. Spoiler alert, one guy actually took him up on that. Today we're not talking about Brody's fans, imitators, or the people who politely tolerated him. We're digging into the men who hated him, plotted revenge, muttered curses, and hoped the next match wouldn't leave them bruised, embarrassed, or facing another Brody beatdown. Lex Luger didn't just fear Brody, he hated him, and for very real documented reasons. In Florida, Luger stepped into a steel cage expecting a match, only to find himself humiliated. Brody ignored his offense, no-sold punches, and treated him like a human prop for the audience's amusement. Luger literally climbed out of the cage mid-match. That wasn't fear alone, it was pure frustration. Luger hated how Brody publicly disrespected him, making a rookie look incompetent in front of fans and peers. Backstage, the resentment only grew. Luger had trained, followed instructions, and worked hard, but Brody had no interest in cooperation. According to shoot interviews, Luger described Brody as a loose cannon who punished anyone who wasn't a hardened vet, leaving rising stars like him powerless to make an impression. Brody's refusal to cooperate and tendency to dominate matches created a professional environment built on humiliation rather than competition. The hatred wasn't about fear, it was about the principle. Luger respected Brody's toughness but loathed his unpredictability and total disregard for others' careers. Every match felt like a minefield, where a single misstep could humiliate you or damage your reputation. Luger resented being forced to navigate that minefield, to constantly prove himself under the shadow of someone who thrived on making others fail. Brody left no room for mistakes, no room for pride, and certainly no room for dignity. For Luger, that wasn't just intimidating, it was infuriating, and it forged a genuine, lasting hatred toward one of wrestling's most feared men. Backstage in the territory days, Brody had a reputation that made even the slickest operators nervous. Heenan didn't mince words in a later shoot, laying out exactly why Brody drove him insane. The core issue, Brody didn't care about anyone but himself. Heenan explained that Brody would no-show or deliberately botch matches to punish promoters, leaving wrestlers, sometimes earning as little as $50, high and dry. Heenan remembered one incident vividly. Brody had promised to appear for a regional card but vanished without notice. "I hated him for it," Heenan said. "Not because he didn't show up for me, but because the guys in the ring were left with nothing. $50 in their pockets, nothing for the families at home. Brody didn't give a damn." The brain went further, describing Brody as a man who treated the schedule like a suggestion, not a commitment. Promoters tried to reason with him. Brody shrugged, claiming he'd only work if it suited him. Every missed appearance or botched sequence was a message to the office, and Heenan couldn't stomach the casual cruelty. Despite the chaos, Brody's in-ring skill was undeniable, which made the hate even sharper. Heenan respected talent, but hated selfishness. "He could have been a hero for everyone," Heenan said. "Instead, he was a tornado of chaos, and we all got swept up in it." It was the perfect storm of skill, ego, and negligence, a combination that earned Brody the wrath of Heenan, a man who understood that wrestling wasn't just showbiz, it was people counting on you. Antonio Inoki prided himself on discipline, hierarchy, and keeping New Japan locked tight under his thumb. Then along came Bruiser Brody, the wild Texan swinging a chain, kicking chairs, and telling promoters exactly where to shove their booking sheet. Their relationship was oil and water. Inoki saw himself as the serious martial artist bringing credibility to wrestling, while Brody treated the business like it was his playground. Brody had zero respect for authority, and that included Inoki's. The heat built from Brody, refusing to follow Inoki's carefully laid out scripts. In Japan, hierarchy is everything. Inoki expected younger foreign talent to bow to the system, eat losses, and keep the machine rolling. Brody wasn't having it. He hated doing clean jobs, and when Inoki pushed for finishes that made him look weak, Brody flat out walked. On one infamous night in 1985, he literally left the ring mid-match against Inoki, brawled to the back, and bolted, leaving Inoki fuming in front of a live crowd. In Japanese culture, That wasn't just unprofessional, it was humiliation. For Inoki, respect was currency. Brody shredded it. Every no-sell, every argument over payoffs, every time Brody flexed his leverage with New Japan, it undercut Inoki's authority. That's why he couldn't stand him. Brody wasn't just difficult, he was uncontrollable. And Inoki hated nothing more than losing control. Humor shot? Inoki wanted to be seen as Japan's Muhammad Ali. Brody treated him more like Japan's substitute teacher, someone to ignore until the bell rang. Bruiser Brody wasn't just disliked by promoters. He had wrestlers who flat out hated him, and nobody more so than Jose Gonzalez, better known in Puerto Rico as Invader One. This wasn't, we don't get along in the locker room heat. This was brooding personal resentment that turned deadly. Gonzalez had long-standing issues with Brody's presence in Puerto Rico. Brody had a reputation for refusing to follow finishes, strong-arming promoters, and working stiff, all things that undermined Gonzalez, who was both a top local star and, at times, a booker for Carlos Colon's WWC. Every time Brody no-sold in the ring, it chipped away at Gonzalez's standing. You can imagine the humiliation. He's the hometown hero, but the wild American makes him look like a rookie. That kind of ego bruise festers. The resentment reached its sick peak in 1988 at the Baymon Stadium show. In the locker room, Gonzalez asked Brody to step aside to talk privately. Minutes later, Brody was bleeding out from stab wounds. That wasn't about a match gone wrong. It was Gonzalez's hatred boiling over after years of professional embarrassment. Court testimony, accounts from Dutch Mantell and Tony Atlas, all point to it. Gonzalez didn't lose his temper that night. He acted on feelings he'd been carrying for years. Gonzalez walked free, acquitted after a trial so messy it felt like Puerto Rico itself was protecting its own. Brody's murder was the final proof. Jose Gonzalez didn't just hate Bruiser Brody, he eliminated him. Wrestling's corridors aren't paved with glitter. They're lined with grudges and bad blood, from Heenan's disdain for lazy, self-serving talent to Inoki's fury at Brody undermining authority, and Gonzalez's deadly resentment, real-life heat-shaped careers, promotions, and in some cases, fates. These weren't scripted promos. This was backstage life where respect was earned, not given, and crossing the wrong person could cost more than a title shot. Every one of these men had reasons to seethe, from financial disputes to professional slights, and their hatred didn't sit quietly. It erupted in words, actions, and in Gonzalez's case, tragedy. The wrestling world thrives on spectacle, but behind the curtain it's ruthless, calculated, and occasionally lethal. The legacy of these feuds reminds us that real-life drama in wrestling wasn't about storylines. It was about survival, respect, and control, all played out in sweat-stained locker rooms. So, next time you watch a match, remember, those sneers, stares, and missteps weren't always acting. Sometimes they were the residue of real animosity that burned hotter than any pyrotechnic. Keep your eyes open and your respect earned, or you might end up the next cautionary tale. Thanks for watching. Paul Roma was the kind of wrestler who could start a fight in an empty room and still leave the room looking worse than he did. His career wasn't built on championship reigns or big money runs. It was built on grudges, shoot interviews, and the ability to annoy just about everyone he ever stood next to. Roma didn't climb the ladder of success. He stood at the bottom, kicked the rungs off, told the guy holding it he was an idiot, then complained nobody helped him up. Everywhere Roma went, bitterness followed like a bad smell. He didn't just rub people the wrong way. He practically used sandpaper. For every highlight in the ring, there was a low light backstage, and Roma seemed to take pride in turning opportunities into hostilities. If resentment was a championship, Roma would have been a Hall of Famer. His grudges weren't passing moods. They were full-blown sagas, dragged out in public and retold with venom years later. Fans saw arrogance. Peers saw ego. Roma saw himself as the only honest man in a room of liars. This isn't about glory. This is Roma's legacy of grudges. Sharp, bitter, and unforgettable. Roma didn't just clash with management and fans, he clashed with his own tag partner. When Power and Glory first formed, Roma recalled Hercules giving him a look, like he wanted to stab me. That's not exactly the start of a brotherhood, more like a murder trial waiting to happen. In the ring, they clicked enough to get reactions, but backstage it was frostier than a freezer's aisle at a grocery store. Roma admitted the tension never fully went away, and it made every day on the road a subtle war of patience and ego. The WWF's handling of Power and Glory only added fuel. Roma claims management deliberately held them back, No merchandise, minimal pushes, and then an abrupt split just as the team started gaining momentum. Roma said the office punished them for being too good without the chosen one's stamp of approval. Every match, every promo, Roma felt like they were fighting against the company more than their opponents. Roma didn't exactly describe Hercules as invested either. He said Herc was distant, sometimes resentful, and often appeared more interested in leaving the building than backing him up. That attitude turned what could have been a solid team into a powder keg. Roma constantly braced for the next blow, whether from management or his own partner. Looking back, Roma's anger was aimed at management and at Hercules. Power and glory could have been iconic. Instead, Roma says the company blocked the merchandise, blocked the push, and blocked the future. And Hercules? He just blocked Roma. Every handshake backstage felt like a battlefield. It's one of Roma's most bitter chapters. A team destined for greatness, buried under backstage politics, mistrust, and ego. Roma wasn't just taking shots at management or partners. He had a long-running beef with the fans and the so-called Four Horsemen faithful who refused to accept him. According to Roma, joining the Horsemen was supposed to be a career highlight, but fans treated him like an interloper from day one. They didn't see a member of the elite. They saw a guy who didn't belong, and Roma didn't hold back in calling them jealous weekend warriors. He said the criticism wasn't just unfair, it was relentless, following him from arena to arena, like a bad smell that wouldn't wash off. Backstage, Roma could hear it too. Other wrestlers would joke or make offhand comments about his spot in the Horsemen, which only added salt to the wound. Roma claimed he worked harder than anyone else, hit every mark, and still got the side-eye from the locker room and the crowd alike. Every cheer for the team, every reaction, was measured against what fans thought he should be doing. And Roma said that never stopped him from calling the hypocrisy out in interviews. The backlash didn't break him, but it left a mark. Roma said being part of the Horsemen taught him that sometimes the people applauding you are the same ones rooting against you in their heads. Fans hated his look, his style, even his name being on the roster. And Roma ate that hate like it was breakfast. He didn't beg for approval, didn't sugarcoat the resentment, and didn't pretend to care about their verdicts. Roma didn't just call out DiBiase, he roasted him alive. According to Roma, Ted spent his career preaching morals, faith, and integrity while quietly hustling every angle and paycheck he could grab. Roma's line cut deep. At the end of the day, his God is spelled M-O-N-E-Y. That's not a metaphor. That's a verdict on a man wrapped in a halo while treating loyalty like it was a coupon to be cashed whenever convenient. Roma said the problem wasn't ambition, it was hypocrisy. Ted cloaked greed and virtue, smiled for the cameras, and then did whatever lined his wallet. Roma claimed this wasn't subtle. Every backstage move, every business choice, every moral lesson he pushed, all profit-driven PR, and Roma saw it. He said that when push came to shove, Ted would pick money over loyalty time and time again. Roma's words didn't come in the heat of the 80s locker room. They came decades later when he had nothing to lose and no reason to hold back. In shoot interviews, he unloaded on a man he saw as a walking contradiction. Fans might have still bought the polished image, but Roma tore it apart, saying the morals were just a mask and the reality underneath was pure hypocrisy. Roma's final judgment was brutal. Preachings were scams, morality a facade, and lessons worthless. Calling out Ted wasn't optional, it was necessary. Roma did it publicly, mercilessly, and left a scar that still stings decades later. Roma didn't just dislike Hogan, he flat out challenged him to a real fight. On the Power and Glory podcast, Roma went in with no filter. I'm talking about none other than brother Hulk Hogan. I'm going to slap the taste of brother out of his mouth. That's not heat. That's Roma, basically telling Hogan he'd rather see him unconscious than on another t-shirt. The grudge came from a personal story. Roma recalled a disabled child showing up late to a Hogan meet and greet. Instead of sticking around a few minutes, Hogan allegedly walked out. Roma never forgave it. He branded Hogan selfish, saying the act exposed the real man behind the bandana, a guy more interested in clocking out than giving joy to a kid who needed it most. For Roma, that wasn't just rude. It was career-ending evidence that Hogan's hero aura was as fake as his spray tan. Roma went further, saying he'd meet Hogan in an octagon and didn't even care if he lost. He just wanted the chance to slap the taste out of him. That's not confidence, that's hatred served raw. Hogan might have called everyone brother, but to Roma, he was just another fraud with a bad dye job. Roma's clash with Vince wasn't a cold grudge, it was a volcanic eruption. On Sean Mooney's Primetime podcast, Roma recounted storming into Vince's office in 1994. He wasn't there to kiss rings, he was there to unload. Roma said flat out, "Power and Glory was the greatest team you ever had, and you did nothing with them." That's not a complaint. That's a middle finger to the man who built an empire by picking winners and leaving others in the dirt. Roma's anger was personal. He nearly lost an arm working through injuries for Vince, and instead of recognition, he felt discarded. While others took time off for what he mocked as a hangnail, Roma and Hercules killed themselves in the ring for scraps. Roma wasn't asking for a medal. He was demanding respect, and Vince didn't give it. The argument got ugly. Roma said Vince got heated, stood up, and tried to puff his chest. Roma fired back with the line that echoed through shoot interviews for years. "You better sit the funk down before I knock you out." Few men in wrestling ever dared say that to Vince. Roma didn't just dare, he meant it. This wasn't petty bitterness. It was a man who felt robbed, staring at the billionaire who cashed the checks and calling him out as a fraud to his face. Roma's honesty was nuclear, his fury real, and if security hadn't been nearby, Vince might have left the office with fewer teeth than his wrestlers. Roma never sugarcoated anything, and that's why his grudges hit harder than most people's punches. He wasn't trying to play politics or rewrite history, he was burning it to the ground. Every story, every beef, every outburst showed the same thing. Paul Roma was never built to bow down. He was built to speak up, even if it cost him everything. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and stick around, because the next round of Wrestling Grudges is going to be even nastier. And trust me, if Paul Roma was watching, he'd tell you the same thing. Don't miss it, or you'll regret it. Thanks for watching. Abdullah. The Butcher wasn't just a wrestler. He was a walking tetanus shot. Every match looked like a crime scene, every opponent left with scars that outlasted their careers, and every promoter quietly hoped he didn't show up that week. Some guys didn't just dislike him, they feared him genuinely, in a way that went beyond storylines or scripted anger. Real shoot-level disgust ran through locker rooms from Japan to Puerto Rico, from lawsuits to walkouts, from whispered warnings over shared dressing rooms to backstage mistrust. Abdullah's legacy isn't just blood, it's pure, undiluted bitterness. This isn't about kayfabe rivalries or in-ring theatrics. This is about the wrestlers who hated Abdullah the Butcher because of who he truly was, reckless, merciless, and unapologetically dangerous. Strap in, because we're counting down 5 real shoots. From hushed locker room warnings to a court case that almost bankrupted him. The only thing sharper than Abdullah's fork? The hatred his real-life behavior inspired. If you want to know how to get on Abdullah's eternal hate list, Eddie Mansfield wrote the manual. Mansfield didn't just cross a line, he lit it on fire, filmed it, and sent the footage to John Stossel at ABC. In 1984, Mansfield went on national TV and broke kayfabe wide open. He showed holds, explained the work, and basically gave Vince McMahon a migraine that lasted 2 decades. Wrestlers were furious, but Abdullah? He took it personal. To him, Mansfield was a Judas with a mullet. Abdullah thrived on mystique. He wanted people to believe he was a fork-wielding lunatic who lived in the shadows. Mansfield, exposing the business, made Abdullah's aura look like a cheap stage trick. And if there's one thing Abdullah hated more than salad, it was someone making his act look fake. Mansfield claimed he was helping wrestlers by exposing unfair contracts. Abdullah saw it as betrayal dressed up as charity. That's like burning down a house and calling it fire safety training. He wasn't impressed. Mansfield tried to argue he was standing up for the boys. Abdullah thought he was standing on the boys' graves. The locker room was already tense, but Abdullah's glare could cut through steel whenever Mansfield's name came up. This wasn't just business heat, this was venom. He saw Mansfield as the guy who spat on decades of blood, sweat, and receipts. Mansfield whining about contracts while making himself a martyr is like complaining your boss didn't pay overtime while you robbed the store blind. Yeah, you'll get attention, but mostly from people who want you dead. Abdullah never forgave Mansfield. To him, Mansfield was the man who handed wrestling's secrets to the enemy, smiling all the way. It wasn't just heat, it was hate so thick you could carve it up with one of Abdullah's forks. Tony Atlas made no secret of how little he thought of Abdullah the Butcher. In shoot interviews, Atlas blasted Abdullah for being filthy in the ring, claiming his gear was never washed and his fork was never clean. Atlas didn't sugarcoat anything, calling him nasty and unsafe, putting Abdullah firmly on his blacklist. Atlas painted a picture of Abdullah as a wrestler who didn't care about anyone's health. He accused him of spreading hepatitis by constantly blading opponents with the same blood-soaked fork. That's not hardcore wrestling, that's what the CDC calls a case study. The hate ran deep. Atlas said guys would outright refuse to work Abdullah because they didn't want scars, infections, or worse. For a man who was built like a comic book hero, Atlas wasn't scared to say the ugliest thing about Abdullah, that he was reckless and disgusting. Atlas even went further, making it clear that Abdullah didn't just hurt people, he embarrassed the business. He believed promoters booked him for cheap gore, not wrestling. Atlas basically said Abdullah made wrestling look like a carnival sideshow where the main attraction was catching a disease. In the end, Tony Atlas wasn't bitter because Abdullah stole his spot. He was bitter because Abdullah stole respect from the locker room. When Atlas buried him in interviews, it wasn't with subtle digs. It was with the bluntness of a man who had seen enough blood to last 3 lifetimes. Abdullah may have scared audiences, but to Tony Atlas, he was just a filthy co-worker nobody wanted to share a locker room with. Atlas gave him a review harsher than Yelp. 1 star, fork not sanitized. Rude Boy, a JCW regular, walked into the ring thinking he could survive a hardcore match with Abdullah the Butcher. Spoiler, he couldn't. Abdullah didn't just wrestle, he punished. The heat wasn't just in the ring, it was the glare, the cold shoulder, the kind of stare that made rookies reconsider life choices. Rude Boy reportedly underestimated Abdullah's willingness to escalate anything into a real shoot fight. Abdullah had no patience for rookies thinking hardcore rules meant fun. Rude Boy learned quickly that bleeding on cue isn't the same as surviving someone who genuinely hated you. According to JCW sources, Abdullah made it very clear backstage that sloppy, half-hearted performances would earn more than a bruise. They'd earn his wrath. Rude Boy walked out of one rehearsal with a swollen lip and a lesson in respect that wasn't in any rulebook. The tension spilled over into interviews. Rude Boy admitted he never knew what hit him when Abdullah started improvising spots that weren't planned. Abdullah, on the other hand, shrugged off any notion of heroics. I don't care if they have a push coming, I hit people hard. That's it. The heat was so thick that even JCW vets gave the room a wide berth whenever Abdullah was present. Rude Boy's shots at Abdullah during later promos didn't help. Abdullah didn't respond on camera. The real work happened behind closed doors, in subtle intimidation and in matches that left permanent marks. Everyone backstage knew. Disrespect to Abdullah, and he doesn't forget. One JCW insider said, he looked at Rude Boy like he'd swallowed something bad and couldn't get it out. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a fact. Abdullah's treatment of Rude Boy became a cautionary tale. Newcomers were warned and veterans watched with quiet amusement. Abdullah's JCW record is pure, unfiltered locker room terror, a ledger of grudges earned and respect extracted, one brutal lesson at a time. Superstar Billy Graham and Abdullah crossed paths in the late 70s, and the friction was immediate. Graham, always protective of his ring psychology and ego, saw Abdullah's chaotic, brutal style as a threat to everything he valued in the squared circle. In multiple shoot interviews, Graham described Abdullah as a guy who didn't give a damn about anyone's safety, emphasizing how Abdullah's wild tactics weren't just dangerous, they were disrespectful. Backstage, Graham refused to trust Abdullah in matches where timing and flow were essential, fearing the Canadian brawler would turn a simple bump into a hospital trip. The tension escalated when Graham caught wind of Abdullah disregarding agreed-upon spots during a televised bout. Graham reportedly stormed the locker room, shouting, "I'm not risking my body for someone who treats wrestling like a demolition site." Fellow wrestlers corroborated that Graham's frustration wasn't performative. It was genuine anxiety for his safety. Several attempts at reconciliation failed, with Graham consistently declining to work on cards featuring Abdullah in the same match. Promoters quickly learned that pairing Graham with Abdullah was a backstage powder keg. Stories from that era describe heated arguments over match layout and ring conduct, with Graham insisting on strict sequences, while Abdullah pushed for his own improvised chaos. One veteran recalled Graham muttering, "He'll take your head off if you blink," summarizing the palpable fear among performers. Even crew members reportedly avoided being near Graham and Abdullah at the same time, anticipating verbal and physical sparks. By the end of their brief overlap, Graham made it clear that Abdullah was persona non grata in his immediate work circle. Their rivalry became a cautionary tale in locker rooms nationwide. Talent could be skilled, but if you were reckless like Abdullah, even legends like Graham would steer clear. That combination of fear, frustration, and outright disgust defined their backstage interactions, leaving a legacy of tension long after both left the territories. Devin Nicholson and Abdullah shared a brief but fiery run in the indie scene, and it quickly became clear that they were combustible together. Nicholson, notorious for his intensity and unpredictability, found a perfect storm in Abdullah's no-holds-barred shoot-first approach. Backstage accounts described Nicholson pacing like a caged tiger whenever Abdullah's name came up on the match card. One promoter recalled, Devin didn't just dislike working with him, he genuinely feared what would happen if Abdullah got carried away. The tension wasn't only in their matches. Nicholson was meticulous with timing and structure, while Abdullah treated every bout like a free-for-all. Multiple wrestlers from the same shows reported that arguments over spots could erupt before the opening bell, with Nicholson lecturing Abdullah on risk management and Abdullah shrugging off the advice like it was an insult. Devin Nicholson's run with Abdullah wasn't just tense, it turned downright dangerous. Behind the scenes, Nicholson was already wary of Abdullah's unpredictable style and stiff strikes, but nothing escalated like the moment Nicholson contracted hepatitis C. Multiple sources confirmed that Nicholson traced the infection directly to a match with Abdullah, instantly shifting their backstage dynamic from annoyance to full-blown animosity. The locker room atmosphere shifted overnight. Wrestlers recalled Nicholson isolating himself, carefully inspecting every piece of shared equipment, and openly confronting Abdullah. In one heated exchange, Nicholson reportedly told Abdullah, voice low and unflinching, "I trusted you in the ring, and now my liver doesn't." The tension wasn't just words. Every subsequent match between them carried a visible edge, with Nicholson hyper-aware of Abdullah's strikes and Abdullah seemingly indifferent to the growing mistrust. Promoters and crew watched as the feud took on a life of its own. Nicholson became meticulous to the point of paranoia, questioning Abdullah's every move, while Abdullah shrugged off concerns, treating the situation with his signature chaotic confidence. One insider noted, "It wasn't just fear, it was a complete lack of trust. Devin knew this guy could really hurt him, and he did." By the end of their stint together, Nicholson's experience with hepatitis C had left a permanent mark on how he approached Abdullah. The two never regained any semblance of camaraderie, and Nicholson made it clear to every promoter afterward that working with Abdullah carried real personal risk. The incident cemented Abdullah's reputation as a volatile and dangerous presence on the indie scene, a wrestler whose unpredictability could cross the line from dramatic tension to genuine health risk. Backstage tension doesn't get cleaner than this. From locker rooms thick with real heat to walkouts, bitter stares, and confrontations that could have ended in lawsuits, and these stories prove wrestling isn't just scripted drama, it's a jungle of real grudges. Careers were tested, reputations scorched, and tempers frayed. Some avoided the ring out of fear, others left with a sour taste they never shook. By the time the dust settled, only the bold or the reckless remained standing. Every hallway whisper, every backstage argument, every clenched jaw tells the same story. Wrestling's magic comes with a side of raw human venom. It's not about who won or lost, it's about who survived the backstage battlefield with their teeth intact and their pride unshattered. For those who think the ring is the stage, the real theater happens behind the curtain, and the echoes of hate linger far longer than any applause. Like and subscribe if you want the backstage, truth served raw, and remember, the more chaos, the better the story. Don't blink, because the next shocker is always waiting just off camera. Thanks for watching. The Dynamite Kid, Tom Billington, was a wrestling innovator, explosive in the ring, influential on a generation, and an absolute nightmare behind the curtain. This wasn't the charming rogue story. This was a man who left scars, not memories. He was admired for his athleticism, sure, but most of the boys hated him with a passion. Ask around long enough, and you'll hear the same answer. Great wrestler, terrible human being. Backstage, Dynamite wasn't just stiff, he was cruel. Ribs went too far, fists flew too often, and grudges never died. He bullied rookies, double-crossed his own family, and left veterans wondering how long before he self-destructed. The respect he earned in the ring evaporated the second he opened his mouth in the locker room. Dark Side of the Ring painted him for what he was: gifted, volatile, dangerous, bitter, vindictive, ruthless, spiteful, and toxic. In short, he wasn't just dynamite. He was a live grenade in a cramped, hostile, paranoid locker room. Or as one wrestler put it, if you didn't hate him, you just hadn't met him yet. Let's get into it. Jacques Rougeau didn't just dislike Dynamite Kid, he wanted to erase him. And for once in wrestling, the audience didn't need convincing. Backstage, Dynamite had built a reputation for being the toughest guy in the room. Not tough in the heroic sense, tough in the make a guy cry in front of his peers sense. Rougeau was one of his prime targets, mocked, bullied, and ribbed to the point of humiliation. Dynamite thought it was hilarious. Everyone else thought it was a matter of time. That time came in 1988. Rougeau ambushed him with a fist full of quarters, smashing Dynamite's teeth like a slot machine that finally paid out. Even Vince McMahon didn't step in, which tells you everything. When the boss refuses to punish you for knocking someone's teeth out, it's because he secretly enjoyed the sound. Bruce Pritchard later admitted most of the locker room quietly supported Jacques. Because Dynamite wasn't feared at this point, he was hated, and nobody cried when he couldn't chew a steak for months. Rougeau summed it up himself. "I did what everyone wanted to do." That wasn't pride, it was public service. Dynamite's reaction? He sulked, he brooded, he threatened revenge. But the message was clear. The days of unchecked bullying were over. The room finally learned one hard truth. Nobody survives being a scumbag forever. And if you think the boys felt bad for him, here's the truth. The only sympathy Dynamite got was from his dentist's bank account. Jacques didn't just knock his teeth out, he just collected overdue rent. Rougeau left him bloody, humiliated, and permanently humbled, a victory the locker room celebrated quietly. Dynamite Kid didn't just destroy careers, he destroyed family ties. Davey Boy Smith, his own cousin and tag partner, learned that the hard way. Nothing says family like plotting to steal your cousin's royalties. The British Bulldogs were supposed to be untouchable, unstoppable, a legacy act. Instead, backstage politics, egos, and Dynamite's unpredictable temper turned the pair into enemies. He made family reunions feel like hostage negotiations. Dynamite bullied Davey, lied to promoters, and even threatened physical confrontation during tours. It wasn't just professional rivalry, it was personal sabotage. If betrayal were an Olympic sport, he'd have 3 golds and a participation medal for good measure. The feud escalated when Dynamite tried claiming parts of Davey's name rights and merchandise revenue. A man who already owed loyalty to his family instead chose bitterness. He wasn't cutting deals, he was cutting ties. Davey fought back legally, emotionally, and sometimes physically, because Dynamite refused to quit. Colleagues remember locker rooms thick with tension. Every shared corridor became a battlefield. It was less British Bulldogs and more British Minefield. Dynamite's arrogance even extended to contracts, making deals behind promoters' backs. Davey finally trademarked British Bulldog, leaving Dynamite with 0 royalties and a reputation as the cousin who destroyed his own team. Family loyalty. 1, Dynamite Kid. 0. By the end, the legend of the British Bulldog was intact. The legend of Dynamite Kid? A cautionary tale. Honky Tonk Man wasn't exactly afraid of anyone in the ring, but Dynamite Kid pushed even him to the edge. In interviews, Honky described Dynamite as brilliant in the ring but a nightmare backstage, noting that the Kid's ego was proportional to his calf size. One night in Stampede, he recalled having to carefully plan spots just to avoid being blindsided. "You had to assume he'd throw a punch if you sneezed wrong," he said. Dynamite's stiffness was infamous. He believed matches were competitions rather than performances, and Honky found himself dodging elbows as if in a bloody chess game. Beyond the physical danger, Honky had to navigate the constant verbal barbs. Dynamite would mock anyone's ring style or physique in front of the locker room, and he didn't care if management or fans were watching. He made it a full-time job to make everyone miserable. Honky laughed bitterly. The humor was lethal. You'd either laugh or cry. Honky himself quipped, at least his insults hit harder than some of his clothesline attempts. Even in tag matches, Honky couldn't relax. Dynamite's unpredictability meant partners could become collateral damage, and Honky saw firsthand how careers were tested. Other wrestlers witnessed Dynamite throwing tantrums over missed cues or sloppy mat work. Honky remembered thinking, "This guy makes me miss working with heels I actually like." Despite his talent, the locker room hated him, and Honky Tonk Man's accounts are among the clearest examples of how truly toxic Dynamite could be. Wrestling wasn't safe with him, and even seasoned veterans felt the weight of his aggression, both physical and mental. For Honky, working with Dynamite was less a match and more a survival course, punctuated with laughter, insults, and the occasional bruise that didn't heal for weeks. Bruce Hart, another Stampede veteran, described him as stiff, stubborn, and impossible to reason with. Even seasoned professionals found his behavior exhausting. If you smiled at him, he saw it as weakness, Bruce recalled. The Kid's arrogance created tension that didn't fade once the bell rang. Locker rooms became battlefields. Greg Valentine's time with Dynamite was tense from the start. He respected the Kid's in-ring ability, but reckless barely scratches the surface. Dynamite's stiff strikes and unpredictable style made every match feel like a minefield. Valentine admitted he sometimes entered the ring, bracing for a bump that was going to be harder than advertised. You couldn't trust him to sell properly, Valentine recalled, and he'd treat tag partners like props, not people. The locker room never felt safe. A casual mistake could spiral into bruises or anger. Dynamite's arrogance, combined with his willingness to push limits, meant even a friendly conversation could turn icy in seconds. Rick Martel's frustrations with Dynamite stemmed from repeated tag match chaos and inflated ego. He thought he was the main event every night, Martel admitted. Working alongside him was like trying to dance with someone who keeps changing the rhythm mid-song. Matches didn't flow naturally because Dynamite would ignore calls or improvise moves that left Martel awkwardly compensating. The stress wasn't just physical, it was mental. Martel described the tension as a constant drain, watching Dynamite treat house shows with dangerous disregard for his partner's safety. Even seasoned wrestlers found themselves walking on eggshells around him, trying to anticipate when a friendly bump might turn into a bone-jarring lesson. Brutus Beefcake's experience with Dynamite was a mix of caution and frustration. While he acknowledged the kid's skill, he couldn't ignore the reckless unpredictability. Every time we worked a match, I wondered which part of me was going to get taken too hard, Beefcake said. House shows became exercises in survival. Move too fast, and you might get slammed unexpectedly. Speak out of turn, and you could endure a stony glare. Dynamite's abrasive personality created tension, not camaraderie. Even in downtime, Beefcake sensed a volatile presence. What started as casual conversation often ended in curt remarks or veiled insults. Wrestling alongside him was as exhausting mentally as it was physically, a reminder that skill alone doesn't make someone a pleasure to work with. Mick Foley hated working with Dynamite Kid. The stress wasn't just physical, it was mental. One house show ended with Foley's jaw dislocated thanks to Dynamite's reckless style, a perfect example of why stepping in the ring with him felt like signing up for a horror show. It wasn't personal, it was ego on steroids. Every bump carried risk, every move demanded constant vigilance. Even veterans walked on eggshells, wondering when a friendly move would turn into a bone-crushing lesson. Foley called it relentless chaos. By the end of tours, the frustration boiled over. Dynamite's in-ring brilliance didn't excuse the havoc he left behind. That jaw, broken, sore, and unforgettable, was the clearest reason Foley didn't just dislike him. He genuinely feared the next encounter. Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid, wasn't just a wrestling icon. He was a walking hazard report with a killer's instinct. Every locker room he entered became a minefield of tension, bruises, and bitter stares. Dynamite left a trail of chaos few could survive. His brilliance in the ring was matched only by the tension he carried backstage. Locker rooms weren't places to relax. They were minefields of insults, stiff shots, and bruised egos. Every partner learned quickly that a careless word or misstep could turn a match into a full-blown nightmare. The stories of fear, frustration, and physical punishment aren't exaggerations. They're the reality of sharing space with a man who respected no one but himself. Even the toughest veterans braced for impact, knowing Dynamite didn't care about reputations, only his own ego and legacy. His shadow still looms over wrestling history. If you had fun today, then hit the like button, press subscribe, and hit the bell and dive deeper into the brutal, shoot-style world Dynamite left behind. Every click fuels more stories of chaos, hatred, and real-life locker room heat. Don't miss the next shot of wrestling reality. Subscribe now. Thanks for watching. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a one-man demolition crew with a microphone, swinging insults harder than his guitar shots. While some protected the business, he protected his grudges. He didn't just name names. He buried them alive, danced on the dirt, made sure nobody forgot, and relentlessly reminded everyone of past mistakes, failures, and humiliations. He thrived on exposing weaknesses, turning every locker room slight into a personal vendetta, leaving a trail of tension and eye rolls wherever he went. Holding a title was only the start. When it ended, bitterness became his weapon, his signature, his art. He magnified every mistake, every bad promo, every overlooked handshake. Nothing escaped his scrutiny. Peers learned quickly that even small slights could explode into massive grudges, leaving tension, suspicion, constant anxiety, whispered rumors, simmering resentment, and a lingering sense of Honky Tonk Man, born Roy Wayne Ferris on January 29, 1953, in Bolivar, Tennessee, is one of wrestling's most flamboyant and enduring heels. He began wrestling in the mid-1970s, honing his craft across the Memphis and Southern territories before hitting the national stage. His gimmick? an Elvis Presley-inspired guitar-toting country singer, was instantly recognizable and perfect for generating heat. He's best known for his run in the World Wrestling Federation in the mid-1980s. Honky captured the Intercontinental Championship in June 1987, holding it for a record-setting 454 days, the longest reign in the title's history at that time. His matches often emphasized character and psychology over pure technicality, but he had a solid in-ring skill set and could carry opponents effectively. Honky's persona thrived on arrogance, showmanship, and sneaky tactics. He was famous for his guitar attacks, eye pokes, and exaggerated antics, which made him a magnet for fan boos and a nightmare for faces to work with. He also had a knack for backstage storytelling, using his charisma to influence angles and heat. Outside the ring, Honky wrestled in multiple territories, including championship wrestling from Florida, Continental Wrestling Association, and Stampede Wrestling. He became a consistent draw thanks to his combination of comedy, aggression, and unpredictability. Honky Tonk Man remains a cultural icon in professional wrestling. His Intercontinental Championship reign, unique persona, and ability to provoke both laughter and ire cemented his legacy. Even decades later, he is remembered as one of the WWF's ultimate heels, the guitar-swinging entertainer who could make a crowd roar and leave opponents spinning, literally and figuratively. Honky Tonk Man had no bigger grudge than with the Ultimate Warrior, a man he openly branded a fraud in paint and tassels. On the surface, the hate came from SummerSlam '88, where Warrior crushed Honky in 31 seconds to take the Intercontinental title. That squash killed a 454-day reign in less time than it takes to find your seat. But here's the twist. Honky himself suggested the quick loss. He figured if he went down fast, he could protect his heat by saying nobody could beat him in a real match. It was supposed to be smart business. Instead, it turned into decades of venom. Honky believed Warrior cheapened the IC belt, turning it from a workhorse's prize into nothing more than a prop for a steroid statue who couldn't wrestle his way out of a paper bag. Honky spent years building that title, and Warrior spent half a minute proving steroids were quicker than storytelling. Honky's hatred wasn't quiet bitterness either. He openly said Warrior ruined wrestling. He mocked his promos, tore down his physique, and branded him a danger in the ring. The irony? Fans loved Warrior's energy. But to Honky, it was proof that the audience had been conned into cheering a man who didn't deserve the spotlight. Honky Tonk Man's issues with Jerry Lawler went beyond wrestling angles. Despite being cousins, their relationship soured badly over how Lawler operated in Memphis. Honky has said in shoots that Lawler ran the territory for himself, giving top billing to his own matches and leaving little room for anyone else to shine. Money was another sore point. Wrestlers working for Lawler often complained about payouts, and Honky backed those claims in interviews. He believed Lawler underpaid talent while positioning himself as the main draw. For Honky, who valued being treated fairly, that created permanent resentment. Their clashes weren't just financial. Honky described Lawler as a manipulator backstage, someone who used his booking power to bury people he didn't like. Honky felt Lawler held down wrestlers who could have gotten over simply to protect his own spot. In Honky's words, Jerry wanted to be the star. If you were better than him, you weren't going to get far. Even when Honky became a star in WWF, the tension lingered. He brought up Lawler in interviews years later, often mocking him and dismissing his legacy outside Memphis. Honky argued that Lawler built his reputation in a bubble, refusing to test himself against bigger national stars until much later. That bitterness didn't fade with time. Honky kept hammering the point home whenever Lawler's name came up. The result was decades of hostility. They weren't just family members who had creative disagreements. They were rivals who genuinely disliked each other's approach to the business. Honky hated Lawler's grip on Memphis, his business practices, and his ego. By Honky's account, the crown was nothing more than a prop for a man who never learned how to share the spotlight. If there's one story that follows Honky Tonk Man everywhere, it's the infamous guitar shot on Jake Roberts during the Snake Pit segment in 1987. Honky swung that sixth string like he was trying out for a demolition derby, and Roberts has claimed ever since that the injury wrecked his spine, shortened his career, and fueled a grudge that never went away. Jake has repeated in shoots that the guitar wasn't gimmicked and that Honky's receipt left him working in pain for years. Roberts even said he never truly forgave Honky for it, because it wasn't just a bad night at work. It was a turning point in his career. But here's the twist. Honky's never carried the same bitterness. In his 2017 RF video interview, he flat out said, "I never had any problem with Jake. People blew that story up. I was told to swing the guitar hard, and I did my job. Jake made a career out of complaining about it. Honky always framed it as just business, nothing personal." This leaves the feud sitting in a weird limbo. Jake with decades of resentment and Honky brushing it off like a mosquito bite. It's one of those grudges that depends on which side of the chute you believe. The best part? Honky joked that if Jake had wanted revenge, he should have just thrown Damien on him backstage. Snake versus Elvis. Let's see who wins. That's pure Honky. Brutal, dismissive, and still making money off of beef. Jake insists ruined his body. For Roberts, it was career-changing heat. For Honky, it was Tuesday. All right, let's get into some of the people Honky never held back on. He was the king of shooting from the hip, and these names always came up when he got rolling. First up, Dusty Rhodes. Honky ripped him to pieces, saying Dusty was lazy, stole ideas from everyone around him, and politicked his way to the top. According to Honky, the dream wasn't creating magic. He was just robbing everyone blind. Then you've got Ric Flair. Honky mocked him for wrestling the same match for 40 years and dismissed Flair's reputation as a national draw. His classic jab? If Flair was that great, why didn't Vince ever make him the man in the 80s? Vince Russo? Honky blamed him for flat-out killing wrestling. To Honky, Russo never knew a headlock from a head of lettuce and booked nothing but garbage. Honky didn't just strut in sequins and play the guitar. He kept a mental scoreboard of every grudge, backstage slight, and botched move. His shoot beefs weren't idle gossip. They were documented, fiery, and brutally honest. He exposed sloppy work, called out dangerous spots, and let no ego go unchecked. By the time the curtain closed, he had left a trail of terrified locker rooms, bruised egos, and wrestlers who double-checked every move before stepping into the ring with him. Honky's shoot history proves one thing. Sequins can shine, but backstage heat burns hotter. He wasn't just a performer, he was a truth-teller in a world full of kayfabe smiles. Every grudge, punch-up, and shoot quote serves as a reminder that, in pro wrestling, talent is noticed, but so is recklessness. Honky's legacy isn't just his gimmick, it's the fear he commanded when someone thought they could cut corners around him. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like what you saw? Smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next dive into Honky's backstage chaos. You'll want a front row seat for every moment of carnage. Thanks for watching.